Please, do not leave me here alone. The small voice disappeared beneath the sound of the winter storm, but Evelyn Carter heard it clearly. In a forest where the snow covered every path and the cold wind made the world feel endless, one forgotten Omega stopped walking and listened. Everyone in her village knew Evelyn as the woman who had been rejected, the Omega no one chose. The woman who returned from a broken bond ceremony with nothing but her quiet dignity. But on this night, she was not thinking about the past. She was thinking about the child who needed help. Evelyn followed the faint sound through the snow-covered trees until she found a young boy sitting near an old wooden shelter. His clothes were covered with snow, and his face showed fear and exhaustion, but he remained calm when he saw her. Evelyn immediately lowered herself to his level. "Are you hurt?" she asked gently. The boy shook his head. "I do not know where I am." His voice was small, but his eyes carried a strange strength that surprised her. Evelyn removed her own cloak and wrapped it around him. She did not ask who he was. She did not wonder what she would gain from helping him. She only saw a child who needed someone to care. "We will find your family," she promised. "You are not alone anymore." What Evelyn did not know was that the boy she had found was not an ordinary child. Miles away, inside the northern palace, an entire kingdom had changed in a single evening. King Adrian Blackthorn stood before his advisors with a controlled expression, listening to the news that his son had disappeared during a journey through the northern lands. The Alpha King was known throughout the realm for his strength, discipline, and calm judgment. He carried the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders and rarely allowed anyone to see his worries. But tonight was different. This was not about politics or royal duties. This was about his son. "Continue the search," Adrian ordered. "Bring him home safely." His voice remained steady, but everyone in the room understood the importance of the moment. The king, who seemed impossible to shake, was facing a fear no crown could remove. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Evelyn guided the child toward her small cottage at the edge of the village. Her home was simple: a wooden table, a warm fireplace, a few shelves filled with herbs, and the peaceful life she had built after being rejected by her former pack. She prepared warm food and made a comfortable place for the boy to rest. The child watched her with curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Evelyn smiled softly. "Because everyone deserves kindness when they need it most." Those words stayed with him. For the first time that night, he felt safe. Evelyn believed she was helping a lost child who would soon return to his family. She never imagined that by sunrise, her quiet act of kindness would bring the most powerful alpha in the north to her doorstep. She never imagined that the world that once overlooked her would soon discover the heart of the Omega they had failed to understand. And she never imagined that the child she protected beneath the winter sky would become the reason an entire palace would remember her name. The small cottage at the edge of the forest had never felt so different to Evelyn Carter. For years, it had been a place of quiet mornings, simple meals, and a life away from the judgment of others. But now, with a young child resting near the warm fireplace, the little home felt like the center of a mystery she could not understand. Evelyn watched the boy carefully as he ate the soup she had prepared. He was polite, quiet, and far calmer than most children his age would be after becoming separated from their family. "What is your name?" Evelyn asked gently. The boy hesitated for a moment before answering. "Liam." She smiled. "That is a beautiful name." She did not ask more questions. She did not want to make him uncomfortable. Instead, she focused on making sure he felt safe. Outside, the winter storm continued, covering the forest with snow. Evelyn knew someone would be searching for him. A child from a wealthy family would have people looking everywhere. But until they arrived, she would protect him as if he were her own family. What she did not know was that the search for Liam had already reached every corner of the Northern Kingdom. King Adrian Blackthorn had not rested since his son disappeared. The palace that usually moved with perfect order was filled with quiet urgency. Advisors searched through reports, guards followed every possible path, and messengers traveled across the kingdom. Adrian stood near the great windows of the royal chamber, looking toward the endless white mountains. Many people saw him as a powerful Alpha King who could solve any problem. They saw the ruler who carried responsibility without hesitation. But they rarely saw the father behind the crown. "Your Majesty," an advisor said carefully, "we will find the prince." Adrian nodded, but his eyes remained focused on the distant forest. "I know," he replied, "but every moment matters." Meanwhile, Evelyn noticed small details about Liam that made her curious. The way he spoke was different from the children in her village. The way he carried himself showed that he had been taught important manners from a young age. Even his simple answers carried a quiet confidence. Still, Evelyn never imagined the truth. To her, he was only a child who needed warmth and kindness. That evening, as snow continued falling outside, Liam looked around the small cottage. "Do you live here alone?" he asked. Evelyn paused before answering. "Yes." The boy looked surprised. "Are you not afraid?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Sometimes. But being alone does not mean being without hope." Liam looked at her thoughtfully. He had spent his life surrounded by people who treated him carefully because of who he was. Yet this woman treated him kindly without knowing anything about his position. She did not bow. She did not ask for anything. She simply helped him because it was the right thing to do. Far away, Adrian received a new report. A small village near the southern forest had discovered signs that his son may have passed through the area. For the first time in hours, hope returned to the palace. The Alpha King prepared to leave immediately. He did not know who had found Liam. He did not know why his son was safe. He only knew that someone had protected the most important person in his life. And deep within the quiet forest, Evelyn sat beside the fireplace, unaware that the child she had welcomed into her home was about to connect her life with the most powerful family in the north. The morning arrived slowly over the southern forest, painting the snow-covered trees with soft golden light. Inside the small cottage, Evelyn Carter prepared a simple breakfast while Liam sat quietly near the fireplace. The peaceful moment felt almost impossible after the stormy night before. Evelyn had spent years living a quiet life, never expecting anything extraordinary to happen. She had accepted that her world would remain small. But now, a child she barely knew had brought a strange warmth into her home. "You do not have to thank me," Evelyn said when Liam tried to help arrange the table. "You needed a safe place, and I had one to offer." Liam looked at her with curiosity. He was used to people treating him differently. He was used to careful words and respectful distance. But Evelyn spoke to him like he was simply a child who needed kindness. There was no fear in her voice, no attempt to impress him, only genuine care. As they shared breakfast, Evelyn noticed that Liam seemed worried. "Are you thinking about your family?" she asked gently. The boy lowered his eyes. "They will be looking for me." Evelyn smiled softly. "Then we will help them find you." Her answer was simple, but it gave him comfort. Meanwhile, the search party from the Northern Kingdom reached the villages near the forest. King Adrian Blackthorn traveled with his most trusted guards and advisors, following every piece of information they received. The Alpha King remained calm on the outside, but everyone around him could see how deeply he cared about finding his son. For Adrian, the journey was not about royal duty. It was about bringing his family back together. When they arrived near the southern village, Adrian listened carefully to the villagers. Most had heard nothing unusual, but one person mentioned a small cottage near the forest edge where a woman lived alone. The description immediately caught the attention of the search team. Adrian looked toward the forest path. "Take me there." The journey was quiet. Snow covered the ground, and the tall trees surrounded them on every side. Adrian had entered countless places as a king, but this path felt different. He was not searching for territory or answers about politics. He was searching for his son. Inside the cottage, Evelyn noticed the change in Liam's expression. He looked toward the window, as if he sensed something familiar. "Is someone coming?" she asked. Liam nodded slowly. "I think so." A few moments later, the sound of approaching footsteps reached the cottage. Evelyn stood near the door, unsure of what to expect. When it opened, she saw a group of people dressed in royal clothing. At the center stood a tall man with a commanding presence. His dark coat, calm expression, and powerful energy immediately showed that he was someone important. Adrian stepped forward, but his attention was not on the room. It was on the child standing safely beside Evelyn. For the first time in many hours, the cold expression of the Alpha King softened. "Liam," he said quietly. The boy ran toward him with relief, and Adrian welcomed his son home. Evelyn watched the reunion silently. She did not know who this man was, but she could see the love between father and son. Then one of the royal advisors looked at Evelyn with surprise. "You found him?" Evelyn simply nodded. "I only helped him when he needed someone." Adrian turned his attention toward the Omega woman who had protected his son without knowing his identity. In that moment, he realized something unexpected. The person who had done the most for his family was someone the world had overlooked. And for the first time, the Northern Alpha King wanted to know the story of the woman who had shown kindness when no one else was watching. The journey back to the Northern Kingdom began beneath a quiet winter sky. Evelyn Carter sat inside the royal carriage beside Liam, watching the endless white landscape pass by through the window. She still could not fully understand how a simple act of kindness had brought her into the world of the royal family. To her, helping a lost child had never been about gaining attention or receiving a reward. It was simply the right thing to do. Across from her, King Adrian Blackthorn remained silent, but his thoughts were far from empty. The Alpha King had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Advisors wanted his decisions. Nobles wanted his approval. Families wanted connections to the crown. But Evelyn had been different. She had protected his son without knowing his identity. She had offered warmth without expecting anything in return. That truth stayed in his mind. When the carriage finally reached the Northern Palace, the gates opened to welcome the returning prince. The palace servants and advisors gathered quickly, relieved to see Liam safe. But their attention soon shifted toward the woman who stepped down from the carriage beside him. Whispers moved through the crowd. Many wondered who she was and why she had been traveling with the royal family. Evelyn noticed the curious looks, but remained calm. She had lived through judgment before. She knew that appearances often influenced how people treated others. Inside the palace, Adrian introduced Evelyn to the royal advisors. "This is the woman who protected my son when he needed help," he explained. The room became quiet. Some advisors looked surprised. Others exchanged uncertain expressions. Lady Victoria Vale, one of the most respected nobles in the court, stepped forward politely. "Your Majesty, we are grateful that the prince has returned safely. But we must understand the circumstances." Evelyn looked at her without anger. She expected questions. She knew someone from outside the palace would naturally be viewed with curiosity. "I did not know who he was," Evelyn said softly. "I only saw a child who needed help." Her simple answer caused the room to become even quieter. Adrian watched the reactions around him. He noticed something important. Many people in the palace were focused on Evelyn's position, her background, and the fact that she was an Omega. But none of those things explained what she had done. The only truth that mattered was her choice. Later that evening, Adrian visited the guest chamber where Evelyn was staying. The palace was peaceful, with warm lights reflecting across the stone walls. "You should know that many people here will have questions," Adrian said. Evelyn nodded. "I understand. Does that bother you?" he asked. She looked toward the window, where snow continued falling over the kingdom. "I have spent a long time being judged by people who never tried to know me. I cannot control what they believe. I can only control what I choose to do." Her answer surprised Adrian. Many people would have asked for recognition. Many would have used this moment to demand a place beside the royal family. But Evelyn asked for nothing. For the first time in years, Adrian felt he was speaking with someone who saw the person behind the crown. Meanwhile, Liam quietly told the palace staff about the Omega woman who cared for him in the forest. He described her kindness, her patience, and the way she made him feel safe. Slowly, the story began spreading through the palace. The woman many people overlooked had protected the royal heir without seeking anything in return. And as the night settled over the Northern Kingdom, Adrian realized that the arrival of Evelyn Carter had brought a change he never expected. She had entered his world as a stranger, but she was already becoming someone impossible to ignore. The days following Evelyn Carter's arrival at the Northern Palace brought a quiet change that many people could feel, but few could explain. The woman who had entered the royal grounds as a stranger was slowly becoming part of the rhythm of palace life. She did not seek attention. She did not ask for special treatment. Instead, she continued doing the same thing she had done before, offering kindness wherever she could. Each morning, Evelyn visited Liam and made sure he felt comfortable in his new surroundings. The young prince often spoke about the small cottage in the forest and the warmth he felt there. To him, Evelyn was not someone important because of a title. She was important because she had been there when he needed someone most. King Adrian Blackthorn noticed these small moments from a distance. He saw how his son trusted her. He saw how the servants smiled when she passed through the halls. He saw how people who had first questioned her began to quietly reconsider their opinions. But not everyone welcomed the change. Some members of the royal council believed Evelyn's presence created uncertainty. They believed the palace should remain a place where tradition decided everything. During a meeting in the Grand Council chamber, several advisors discussed the situation carefully. "Your Majesty," one advisor said, "we understand that she helped the prince. That is something we are grateful for. But her position in the palace must be considered." Adrian listened without interruption. He knew these concerns were not only about Evelyn. They represented years of beliefs that were difficult to change. Before he could answer, Evelyn entered the chamber carrying a small collection of notes about the villages near the palace. She had spent the previous days speaking with servants and learning about the needs of the people who lived under the kingdom's protection. She did not realize the conversation had been about her. When she noticed the room becoming quiet, she respectfully stepped forward. "I apologize if I interrupted." Adrian looked at her and gently shook his head. "You did not." Evelyn placed the notes on the table. "I wanted to share what I learned from the people working around the palace. They have simple concerns, but they matter." The advisors looked surprised. They expected someone who had entered the royal world to focus on herself. Instead, Evelyn was thinking about others. Adrian studied the expressions around the room. Once again, Evelyn had shown them who she was without needing to defend herself. Later that afternoon, Adrian walked with Evelyn through the palace gardens. The winter air was cold, but the sunlight created a peaceful feeling across the snow-covered paths. "You continue to surprise everyone here," Adrian said. Evelyn smiled slightly. "I am not trying to surprise anyone." "Then what are you trying to do?" he asked. She looked toward the distant mountains. "Just make sure I leave every place a little better than I found it." Those words stayed with Adrian. He had spent years believing that leadership came from strength and authority alone. But Evelyn reminded him that a kingdom was not only built by decisions from a throne. It was built through the care people showed each other every day. That evening, Liam asked Evelyn if she would stay in the palace a little longer. She looked at the young prince and smiled. "If your father agrees, I would be happy to." When Adrian heard about the conversation, he felt something he had not expected. For the first time in many years, the palace did not feel like a place filled only with responsibility. It felt warmer. It felt more like a home. And deep within the northern kingdom, a quiet truth was beginning to emerge. The Omega woman everyone once overlooked was becoming the person who reminded the entire palace what compassion truly meant. The northern palace slowly began to feel different as the days passed. It was not because of new laws or grand announcements. It changed because of small moments that revealed something deeper about the people living within its walls. Evelyn Carter noticed these changes, but she never took credit for them. She continued her days with the same gentle purpose that had guided her since the night she found Liam in the forest. She helped the palace healers organize supplies, listened to the concerns of servants, and spent time with the young prince whenever he wanted company. She never acted as if she belonged above anyone else. To Evelyn, every person deserved the same kindness. King Adrian Blackthorn watched all of this carefully. The Alpha King had spent years believing that responsibility meant carrying every burden alone. He believed a ruler needed to appear unshakable at all times. But Evelyn showed him another way. She proved that strength could exist in patience, compassion, and understanding. One afternoon, Adrian found Evelyn in the palace library. She was reading old records about the northern villages, learning about the history and traditions of the kingdom. Most people who enter this palace spend their first days trying to understand how much influence they can gain, Adrian said. Evelyn looked up and smiled. "I am not here to gain influence." "Then why are you here?" he asked. She thought for a moment before answering. "Because Liam needed someone. And because I believe every place can become better when people care about each other." Adrian remained silent for a moment. Her answer was simple, but it carried a meaning he rarely heard. Most people around him spoke about power, alliances, and expectations. Evelyn spoke about people. That evening, the royal council gathered again to discuss the future. Some advisors accepted Evelyn's presence more than before, but others still questioned whether an Omega woman from outside the palace could truly understand royal responsibility. Lady Victoria Vale expressed the concerns of those who feared change. "Your Majesty, kindness is valuable, but the royal family must also consider tradition." Adrian looked across the chamber. He understood the importance of tradition, but he also understood that traditions could not survive if they ignored what was right. Tradition should guide us, he said calmly. But it should never prevent us from recognizing someone's true worth. The room became quiet. Those words carried more weight because everyone knew Adrian rarely spoke without careful thought. After the meeting, Liam joined Adrian and Evelyn in the garden. The young prince happily talked about the forest cottage and the stories Evelyn had shared with him. Adrian listened as his son smiled in a way he had not seen for a long time. He trusts you, Adrian said quietly when Liam walked ahead. Evelyn looked toward the child. Trust is something we build. It cannot be demanded. Adrian smiled slightly. It was a small expression, almost impossible for others to notice, but Evelyn saw it. She saw the person behind the crown. The cold ruler the world feared was also a father who wanted his son to be happy. As the sun disappeared behind the snowy mountains, Adrian realized that Evelyn had changed something within the palace. She had not done it through status or authority. She had done it by showing everyone that kindness was not a weakness. It was a choice. And every day, more people in the Northern Kingdom began to understand why the woman who had been overlooked by many was becoming someone they could not ignore. The Northern Kingdom continued to change in ways that surprised even those who had lived within the palace for many years. The greatest changes were not found in grand ceremonies or royal announcements. They appeared in quiet moments, in the way people spoke to each other, and in the way the palace slowly opened its doors to someone who had once been considered an outsider. Evelyn Carter never expected this transformation. She still saw herself as the same Omega woman who lived near the forest, the same person who believed kindness was simply something everyone deserved. But others had begun to see something she had never recognized in herself. They saw courage. They saw wisdom. They saw someone who carried warmth into a place that had forgotten it. King Adrian Blackthorn noticed the difference more than anyone. He had spent years surrounded by people who respected his title but rarely understood him. Many saw the Alpha King as a symbol of strength, a ruler who could never show uncertainty. But Evelyn saw beyond the crown. She saw the person who worried about his son, the person who carried responsibility quietly, and the person who needed someone who would speak honestly. One evening, Adrian invited Evelyn to walk through the northern gardens. The snow-covered paths reflected the soft light of lanterns placed along the stone walkway. When you arrived here, many people wondered why I allowed you to stay, Adrian said. Evelyn looked toward the frozen lake nearby. I wondered the same thing. Adrian looked surprised. You did? She smiled gently. I am not someone who belongs in a palace. I know that. That is not true, Adrian replied. Evelyn looked at him. Why? He paused before answering. Because this palace has spent years valuing the wrong things. It has looked at names, positions, and appearances. But you reminded everyone that character matters more. Evelyn remained quiet. She had heard many people speak about her kindness, but hearing those words from Adrian felt different. It was not a compliment from a king. It was recognition from someone who truly understood. The following morning, the royal council gathered once again. This time, the conversation was different. The advisors no longer questioned whether Evelyn had a place in the palace. Instead, they discussed how her ideas about helping the villages could improve the kingdom. Some still held on to old beliefs, but even they could not deny the changes happening around them. Lady Victoria Vale watched Evelyn carefully. She had once believed that an Omega woman without royal connections could never influence the future of the North. But she had witnessed something unexpected. Evelyn never demanded respect. She earned it through every choice she made. Later that day, Liam asked Evelyn to join him in the palace garden. The young prince showed her the small plants growing near the walls, explaining how he wanted to create a garden like the one near her cottage. Evelyn smiled as she listened. That is a wonderful idea, she said. A place where people can feel peaceful. From a distance, Adrian watched the two of them together. He realized that his son had found more than someone who protected him in the forest. He had found someone who brought happiness back into his life. And Adrian had found something he never expected either. He had found a person who did not see him as a king first, but as someone who also needed understanding. As winter slowly began to fade across the northern kingdom, the truth became impossible to ignore. The woman once dismissed by others had become the heart of a changing palace. And soon, the entire kingdom would learn that the greatest influence did not always come from a throne. Sometimes, it came from the kindness of someone who asked for nothing in return. The northern kingdom stood beneath a changing sky as the final days of winter began to disappear. For many years, the palace had been known as a place of tradition, responsibility, and careful distance. But now, something new had entered its halls. It was not a new law or a royal decree. It was a feeling of warmth that came from a woman who had never asked for recognition. Evelyn Carter continued to live each day with the same quiet purpose. She visited the villages near the palace, listened to the concerns of the people, and offered help wherever she could. She never acted as if her growing importance changed who she was. To Evelyn, kindness was not something to display. It was something to practice. King Adrian Blackthorne watched as the kingdom slowly began to see her the way he had started to see her. Not as an outsider, not as an Omega who needed approval, but as someone whose heart carried the qualities of a true leader. One morning, Adrian called for a special gathering inside the grand hall of the palace. The nobles, advisors, and members of the royal family gathered together. Evelyn stood quietly beside Liam, unaware of what the king intended to announce. Adrian looked across the room and saw the same people who once questioned whether Evelyn belonged there. But he also saw how much had changed. A kingdom is not defined only by its strongest warriors or its oldest traditions, Adrian said. A kingdom is defined by the way it treats those who need kindness and understanding. The hall became silent. Everyone listened carefully. Adrian continued. There are moments when we must recognize the people who bring positive change, even when they come from places we never expected. His eyes moved toward Evelyn. Evelyn Carter showed this kingdom something we had forgotten. True strength does not always appear through authority. Sometimes it appears through compassion. Evelyn felt the weight of those words. She had never wanted a position or a title. She had never dreamed of standing before the royal court. Yet now, she understood that her actions had created a connection with people who once would never have noticed her. After the gathering, some members of the palace approached her with a different attitude. They no longer looked at her as someone who did not belong. They asked about her ideas, her experiences, and the villages she cared about. Even Lady Victoria Vale, who had once questioned her place, offered a quiet acknowledgement. "I misjudged you," she admitted. Evelyn responded with a gentle smile. Many people judge what they do not understand. What matters is what we choose to learn afterward. Later that evening, Adrian found Evelyn standing near the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The mountains reflected the colors of the sunset, and the lights of the villages below created a peaceful scene. "You changed this place," Adrian said. Evelyn looked at him and shook her head. "People changed because they were willing to listen." Adrian smiled softly. "That is exactly why you changed it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked across the kingdom they had both grown to care about. Adrian had spent years believing that being a strong ruler meant never needing anyone. Evelyn had shown him that trust did not weaken a person. It made them stronger. As the night settled over the northern kingdom, the palace prepared for a new chapter. The Omega woman who once lived quietly near the forest had become someone the entire kingdom respected. And the Alpha King who once carried everything alone had finally discovered that the greatest treasures were not found in power or status, but in the people who brought light into his life. The first signs of spring arrived quietly in the northern kingdom, bringing a new feeling to the land and the people who called it home. The snow that once covered the mountains began to melt, revealing the paths beneath and reminding everyone that even the longest winter eventually changed. Inside the palace, another transformation had already taken place. The halls that once felt distant and cold now carried voices filled with hope, laughter, and connection. At the center of this change stood Evelyn Carter, the Omega woman who never expected her life to become part of the royal story. She remembered the night she found Liam in the forest. She remembered the fear in his eyes and the simple choice she made to help him. At that moment, she did not know his name, his family, or his place in the world. She only knew that someone needed kindness. That choice had changed everything. King Adrian Blackthorne often thought about that night as well. He had spent years believing that protecting his kingdom required him to remain distant and unbreakable. But Evelyn showed him that a true leader did not have to stand alone. A king could listen. A ruler could care. A person could be strong while still showing compassion. One morning, Adrian and Evelyn walked through the palace gardens with Liam between them. The young prince laughed as he described the plants he wanted to grow near the castle walls. Evelyn listened carefully, encouraging every idea he shared. Adrian watched them both and realized how much his life had changed. Before Evelyn arrived, the palace was filled with duty but lacked warmth. Now, it felt like a place where people belonged. "You gave my son something I could not give him during those difficult days," Adrian said quietly. Evelyn looked surprised. "I only helped when he needed someone." Adrian smiled. "That is exactly what makes it meaningful." Evelyn looked across the garden, remembering the person she used to be. The woman who believed rejection had taken away her future. The woman who wondered if she would ever be valued. But now she understood something important. Her worth had never depended on being chosen by someone else. It had always existed within her. Across the kingdom, people began sharing stories about the Omega woman who changed the palace through simple acts of kindness. They remembered how she helped without expecting anything. They remembered how she treated everyone with respect, whether they had power or not. The lesson spread beyond the royal walls. Years of tradition had taught many people to judge others by their position, but Evelyn reminded them that character mattered more than appearance. On the balcony overlooking the kingdom, Adrian stood beside Evelyn as the sun set behind the mountains. The Northern Alpha King, once known only for his cold strength, now carried a different kind of power. He had found trust, he had found understanding, and he had found someone who saw the person behind the crown. Evelyn looked at the kingdom below and smiled. She had arrived in the north as someone the world ignored. She remained there as someone the kingdom respected, not because of a title, not because of a position, but because she chose kindness when no one was watching. And that choice became the beginning of a new era for the Northern Kingdom, where compassion was remembered as the greatest strength of all.